There's a story in your Bible that you are never supposed to understand. 4 verses buried in Genesis 6 that read like a corrupted file, a fragment of something much larger that someone deliberately tried to erase. For 2,000 years, religious institutions have told you these verses are metaphor, poetry, ancient confusion. They're lying, or at the very least, they're protecting you from a truth so destabilizing that it was systematically removed from Scripture, hidden in caves and relegated to the category of forbidden literature. Tonight we're going to restore the deleted chapters of human history. We're going to talk about what happened before the flood and why it was never meant to survive. Open your Bible to Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. If you're reading from a modern translation, you'll find approximately 80 words. 80 words to describe an event so catastrophic that it required the complete annihilation of the known world to fix. Let me read them to you exactly as they appear. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." Stop. Read that again. Sons of God, Nephilim, heroes of old. The text doesn't explain who these beings are. It doesn't tell you where they came from or what happened to them. It simply drops them into the narrative like you're supposed to already know. Like you walked into a movie 20 minutes late and everyone's acting like the plot makes sense. This is not an accident. This is the scar tissue of editing. The Bible you hold in your hand is a curated document. Entire books were removed, burned or declared heretical by councils of men who decided what you were allowed to know about your own origins. And the single most suppressed text in all of religious history is the Book of Enoch. For over 1,000 years, Enoch existed only as rumour in the West. Church fathers quoted it. The Book of Jude in the New Testament directly references it. But the book itself, gone, vanished, declared apocryphal, non-canonical, dangerous. Then in the 18th century, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce travelled to Ethiopia and returned with 3 copies of a manuscript that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had been guarding for millennia. It was Enoch, the full unedited account of Genesis 6. And what it described was not metaphor, it was a minute-by-minute documentation of the event that broke the world. The Book of Enoch doesn't speak in riddles. It names names. It gives dates, locations, and a complete organisational chart of the beings involved. It tells you exactly who the sons of God were. They were watchers, angels assigned to observe humanity, forbidden from interfering, and it tells you exactly what the Nephilim were. They were the hybrid offspring of a cosmic crime. Enoch was written before Genesis. It's older than the Torah in its current form. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the Qumran caves in 1947, contained multiple copies of Enoch in Hebrew and Aramaic, proving it was considered scripture by the Jewish sect that preserved the earliest biblical texts. So why was it removed? Because it answered questions the institutional church didn't want answered. Let me give you the traditional explanation first, the one you were taught in Sunday school, the Sethite Interpretation. According to this view, the sons of God were the righteous descendants of Seth, Adam's 3rd son. The daughters of men were the corrupt descendants of Cain. When these 2 groups intermarried, they produced mighty men, warriors, leaders. The Nephilim were just really tall humans, nothing supernatural, nothing to worry about. This interpretation was formalised by Augustine in the 5th century and became the official doctrine of the Catholic Church. It remains the dominant view in mainstream Christianity today. Here's the problem. Nobody in the ancient world believed that. Not the Jews, not the early Christians, not the pagans. When you read the writings of Josephus, Philo, the church fathers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, They all understood Genesis 6 the same way. The sons of God were angels, the Nephilim were giants born from the union of divine beings and human women. This wasn't fringe speculation, it was the standard reading. So what changed? Why did the church suddenly pivot to the Sethite view? Because the alternative was too dangerous. It implied that the spiritual realm could physically interfere with the material world. It suggested that the bloodline of humanity had been corrupted at the genetic level, and it meant that the flood wasn't just about sin, it was about contamination, the sons of God. In Hebrew, B'nai Elohim. This term appears only a handful of times in the Old Testament, and in every other instance, it unambiguously refers to divine beings. Job 1:6. The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Job 38:7. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. These are not humans. These are members of the divine council, celestial entities, angels. To claim that Genesis 6 suddenly uses the exact same phrase to mean something completely different, the sons of Seth, is linguistic gymnastics. It's a retcon, a rewrite designed to make the text safe. But let's go further. Let's go to the source document. 1 Enoch, chapters 6 through 10. This is the full account, the unfiltered version. And what it describes is not a gradual moral decline, it's an invasion. Chapter 6, verse 1. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. The leader of this rebellion was Samyaza. He wasn't acting alone. He had a council, 200 watchers. They knew what they were doing was forbidden. They knew the consequences. So they made a pact. Chapter 6, verse 4. Then Samyaza, their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him, and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then they all swore together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. This is a binding contract, a cosmic conspiracy. They swore on Mount Hermon. The name Hermon comes from the Hebrew word Hiram, meaning cursed or devoted to destruction. It's located on the border of modern-day Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. It's the tallest peak in the region, snow-capped, isolated. It was the staging ground for the most consequential act of rebellion in the history of creation. 200 angels descended. They didn't just take wives. They didn't just produce offspring. They did something far worse. They transferred knowledge. Enoch chapter 8 gives you the full inventory. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates. He taught them metallurgy, the technology of war. Armoured warfare didn't exist before this moment. Humans were using stone tools. Suddenly they're forging bronze and iron. Shemiaza taught enchantments and root cutting. This is pharmacology. Pharmakia, the Greek word for sorcery. It's where we get pharmacy, the knowledge of plants, drugs, potions, poisons. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. This wasn't education, it was weaponization. They were giving primitive humanity the tools to accelerate beyond their natural development, to bypass the slow grind of civilization and leapfrog directly into an age of power, vanity, and corruption. And in exchange, they wanted access to human genetics. They wanted to create a hybrid race. Why? The text doesn't say explicitly, but the implication is clear. They wanted to anchor themselves to the physical realm, to incarnate, to become flesh, and they succeeded. The offspring of these unions were called Nephilim. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root naphal, which means to fall, the fallen ones. These were not normal children. Enoch describes them as giants, 3,000 ells tall. An ell is roughly 18 inches. That's 4,500 feet. Obvious hyperbole, but the point stands. These were beings of immense size and strength. They consumed everything. Chapter 7, verse 2. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. The Nephilim didn't just eat food, they ate people, they were apex predators, humanity became livestock, and the corruption spread beyond genetics. Chapter 7, verse 5. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. This is genetic tampering, the creation of chimeras, creatures that were hybrids of multiple species. This is why ancient mythology is filled with monsters. The Minotaur, the Sphinx, the Griffin, centaurs. These weren't fantasies, they were memories, corrupted, distorted, but memories nonetheless. The world before the flood was not primitive, it was advanced, ruled by god-kings. The Nephilim became the heroes of old, the men of renown. Every ancient culture has legends of these figures. The Greeks called them Titans, and demigods, Hercules, Perseus, Achilles. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki. The Egyptians had their pharaohs who claimed divine parentage. Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, was described as 2/3 god, 1/3 man. His epic is one of the oldest written stories in existence. He was a Nephilim, a giant, a hybrid, and he was real. The megaliths scattered across the planet. Baalbek, Stonehenge, the pyramids, these weren't built by humans with copper tools and wooden sledges. They were built by beings with knowledge and strength far beyond ours. The stones at Baalbek weigh over 800 tons. We can't move them today with modern cranes, but they're cut with laser precision and fitted together so tightly you can't slide a piece of paper between them. Who built them? The answer was right there, in Genesis 6, and then it was deleted. The violence became unbearable. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This wasn't moral failure. This was genetic corruption. The bloodline of Adam, the image of God in man, was being systematically polluted. If this continued, there would be nothing left to redeem. No pure human DNA. No pathway for the promised Messiah. The entire plan of salvation would be derailed. And so a decision was made, a terrible, necessary decision. The earth had to be reset. But before the flood, there was war, not between nations, between the Nephilim themselves. Enoch chapter 10 verse 9. And to Gabriel said the Lord, proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of the watchers from amongst men. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy each other in battle. The giants were turned against one another. Their kingdoms fractured. They tore each other apart. And while they bled out in their civil war, 4 archangels were dispatched to deal with the watchers themselves. Michael was sent to bind Samyaza and his associates. Uriel was sent to warn Noah. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel. Gabriel was sent to destroy the Nephilim. And Enoch, the 7th from Adam, the man who walked with God and was taken so that he did not see death, was brought before the imprisoned watchers to deliver their sentence. They begged him to intercede, to ask for mercy. Chapter 13, verse 4. And they asked me to draw up a petition for them that they might find forgiveness and to read their petition in the presence of the Lord of heaven. Enoch ascended. He stood before the throne, and the answer came back. Chapter 14, verse 4. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men complain, saying, bring our complaint before the Most High. Ye have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on earth. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. No peace. That was the verdict. The watchers would be bound in chains of darkness until the day of judgment. 70 generations. And when the Nephilim died, their spirits, being hybrids of flesh and spirit, could not pass on. They became the demons of the New Testament, disembodied, wandering, seeking hosts. This is why demons in the Gospels beg not to be cast into the abyss. They know where they came from. They know what's waiting. And then the rain began. The rain did not begin gently. There was no soft patter on rooftops, no gradual darkening of the sky. The windows of heaven were torn open. The fountains of the great deep erupted. The earth split. And the water came all at once, rising faster than anything alive could outrun. Within hours, the lowlands were gone. Within days, the mountains began to disappear. Within weeks, the entire world was submerged under a churning black ocean that stretched from horizon to horizon, with nothing breaking its surface except one single vessel, the Ark. But the flood was not the beginning of the end. It was the conclusion of a war that had already been fought and lost. The giants were already dead by the time the first drop fell. Their kingdoms were already ruins. The watchers were already in chains. The flood was the clean-up, a cosmic sterilization protocol, because the corruption had gone so deep that the soil itself was tainted. The genetic code of every living thing had been tampered with. The entire biosphere had become a lab experiment gone catastrophically wrong, and so it had to be wiped, not as punishment, as quarantine. Genesis is silent on the details. It compresses the entire pre-flood age into a handful of verses. But the Book of Enoch, preserved in Ethiopia, and fragments found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, fills in the blank pages. It tells us what happened in the final days before the water came. And it is not a story of divine wrath descending on an unsuspecting world. It is a story of surgical precision, a coordinated multi-stage operation to remove a cancer before it metastasized beyond the point of no return. The first phase was the civil war. Enoch chapter 10 is explicit. The Nephilim were not destroyed by God directly. They were turned against each other. Send them one against the other, that they may destroy each other in battle. Why? Because they were warriors, kings, conquerors. If they had united, even heaven would have had to deploy force on a scale that would have obliterated the earth entirely. So they were fractured. Their alliances were dissolved. Their pride was weaponized. Kingdom fought kingdom. Brother fought brother. The age of the Titans became the age of the Titanomachy, the war of the gods. This is not speculation. Every ancient culture has a memory of this event. The Greeks called it the war between the Olympians and the Titans. The Norse called it the binding of the wolf Fenrir and the chaining of Loki before Ragnarok. The Hindus preserved it in the story of the Asuras, the fallen demigods, being cast down by the Devas. These are not separate myths. They are fragmented cultural memories of the same event, filtered through different languages and symbols. The pre-flood world was global. The corruption was global. And the memory of its collapse survived the flood in every survivor's bloodline. While the Nephilim destroyed themselves, the Watchers were dealt with. 4 archangels were dispatched with specific assignments. Michael, the warrior, was sent to bind Samyaza, the leader of the rebellion. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel, the one who had taught humanity the art of war and cosmetics, the one who had given them the tools to become vain and violent. Gabriel was sent to ensure the destruction of the Nephilim offspring was total. And Uriel, the light of God, was sent to warn Noah, to tell him what was coming, to give him the blueprints for survival. Enoch himself, the man who had walked with God and been taken up so that he did not see death, was brought into the judgment chamber. The Watchers, now imprisoned in darkness, begged him to intercede. They asked him to petition the throne for mercy, to ask if there was any way back. Enoch ascended. He entered the presence of the Most High, and he was given the message to deliver. Chapter 14, verse 4. You have been in heaven, But all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to women. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. Whoa, no peace. That was the answer. Not now, not ever. The sentence was final. They would be bound in the earth until the day of judgment. 70 generations. The number is specific. 70 generations from the flood to the end. Scholars have debated what this means. Some say it is literal, others say it is symbolic. But the implication is the same. The watchers are not gone. They are imprisoned, and the clock is counting down. But what about their children? The Nephilim were flesh and blood. When they died, their bodies returned to the earth. But they were hybrids, half angel, half human, and hybrids do not have a place in the natural order. A human soul, when it dies, goes to Sheol. An angelic being, when it falls, goes to the abyss. But a Nephilim, the offspring of both, it has nowhere to go. And so, according to Enochian theology, when the giants died, their spirits became trapped on the earth. Disembodied, wandering, desperate. These are the demons of the New Testament. This is why demons, when confronted by Yeshua, do not ask to be destroyed. They beg not to be sent to the abyss. They beg to be allowed to enter pigs, to inhabit bodies, anything to avoid being cast into the prison where their fathers are held. They know what is waiting there. They know the chains. They know the darkness. And they will do anything to delay their return. This reframes the entire spiritual landscape of the Bible. Demons are not fallen angels. Fallen angels are the watchers, and they are already bound. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the illegal offspring of a forbidden union. And they are still here. They are the unseen force behind idolatry, behind possession, behind the insatiable human appetites for violence and perversion. They are the ghosts of the pre-flood world, trying to reclaim what was taken from them. And then the rain came, not as a surprise. Noah had been building for decades, preaching, warning. The entire time the ark was under construction, it was a countdown clock, visible to everyone. A massive wooden monument to coming judgment. And no one listened. They mocked. They ate. They drank. They married. They gave in marriage. Yeshua would later say, "As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man." What does that mean? It means the same pattern, the same blindness, the same refusal to see the signs even when they are staring you in the face. The water rose, fast. The Bible says the fountains of the great deep burst open. This is not poetic language. This is geological language. The crust of the earth fractured. Subterranean reservoirs of water, held under pressure since creation, exploded upward. Geysers miles high. The tectonic plates shifted. The earth convulsed. And from above the floodgates of heaven opened. Not rain. A deluge. A wall of water. The two sources met in the middle, and the world drowned. Every living thing that breathed air died. The text is emphatic. Everything on dry land, in whose nostrils was the breath of life, perished. The Nephilim, already weakened by war, were swept away. The animals, corrupted by genetic tampering, were erased. The plant life, twisted into something unrecognizable, was uprooted. The earth was reset, returned to a chaotic, watery void, just as it had been in Genesis 1:2, before the Spirit of God hovered over the surface and spoke order into existence. The flood was a decreation event, a cosmic undo button. But one family survived, 8 people, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. And with them, representatives of every kind of animal, chosen and brought to the ark, not by Noah's effort, but by divine orchestration. The text says the animals came to Noah. He did not have to round them up. They came. Why? Because they were the uncorrupted remnant, the clean genetic lines, the ones that had not been tampered with. The ark was not just a boat, it was a biological vault, a floating gene bank, the backup drive for Earth's operating system. For 40 days and 40 nights, the water rose, then it stopped, but it did not recede immediately. The earth was covered for 150 days, 5 months. The ark drifted on a global ocean with no land in sight. Imagine the silence, the absolute absence of life outside those wooden walls. No birds, no insects, no distant sounds of civilization. Just water and wind and the creaking of the ark as it rode the swells of a drowned planet. When the water finally began to recede, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The peaks emerged first, then the hills, then the valleys. The earth dried slowly, and when Noah finally opened the door and stepped out onto the mud, he was stepping into a completely new world. A world scrubbed clean. A world where the memory of the giants would fade into legend. A world where humanity would be given one more chance. But the war was not over. The Watchers were bound. The Nephilim were dead, but their spirits remained. And the knowledge they had given to humanity, the forbidden secrets, those could not be unlearned. Metallurgy, astrology, sorcery, genetic manipulation. The post-flood world would be smaller, weaker, less corrupt, but it would not be innocent. The seeds had been planted, and they would sprout again. The door of the ark swung open. Sunlight, real sunlight, not filtered through storm clouds or mist. Noah stood at the threshold and breathed air that had not been breathed by another human being in over a year. The earth was empty, silent. The mountains of Ararat stretched out beneath him, their peaks still wet, their slopes barren. No trees, no grass, just rock and mud and the residue of judgment. He built an altar. The first act in the new world was worship. He took clean animals, the ones that had been preserved in greater numbers for this very purpose, and he offered them as burnt sacrifices. The smoke rose into the sky, and the text says God smelled the pleasing aroma, not because God needs food or enjoys the scent of burning flesh, but because the act represented something deeper. Acknowledgement, submission, gratitude. Noah understood what had just happened. He had witnessed the end of an age. He had seen the eradication of the most powerful beings ever to walk the earth. And he knew, standing there on that muddy peak, that he was starting over. God made a covenant. Never again would the earth be destroyed by flood. The rainbow, a weapon of war in the ancient world, a warrior's bow, was hung in the sky as a sign. The battle was over. The bow was set down, but the covenant came with new rules. The world that emerged from the water would not be the same as the one that went into it. Humanity was given permission to eat meat. Before the flood, the diet was plant-based. Now, animals were added to the menu. Why? Because the earth had changed. The atmospheric pressure had collapsed. The water canopy, if it existed, was gone. The environment that allowed people to live for 900 years was gone. Humanity would age faster, die younger. They needed denser nutrition to survive. The long lifespans of the patriarchs would begin a steady decline. Noah lived 950 years. His son Shem lived 600. By the time you get to Abraham, it's 175. By Moses, 120. By King David, 70. The decay was accelerating. But something else changed, something darker. God instituted capital punishment. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. This was not in place before. Why now? Because the world, after the flood, would still have violence, it would still have corruption, and without the long lifespans to serve as a natural deterrent, without the presence of the Watchers to rule as tyrant gods, humanity needed a new mechanism to restrain evil. Government, law, the sword of justice placed in human hands. Noah's 3 sons stepped off the ark with him, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these 3, the entire post-flood population would descend. Every person alive today traces their lineage back to one of these men. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 lays it out. Shem became the father of the Semitic peoples, the line that would eventually produce Abraham, Israel, and the Messiah. Japheth spread north and west, becoming the father of the Indo-European nations. Ham went south, and from him came the Canaanites, the Egyptians, and most importantly for our story, a man named Nimrod. Nimrod is where the post-flood world begins to go wrong. He was the son of Cush, the grandson of Ham, and the text gives him a title that should make us pause. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That phrase, before the Lord, doesn't mean in the sight of, or blessed by, or roshit haya. In Hebrew it carries a sense of opposition, against the Lord. Nimrod was not a righteous man, he was a rebel. His very name means we will rebel, and he was mighty. The same word used to describe the Nephilim, Gibborim, mighty ones, men of renown. Was Nimrod himself a Nephilim? The text doesn't say explicitly, but the language is suggestive, and the Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, says that Nimrod gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God. He was the first king, the first empire builder, the first to centralize power and demand worship. And he did it in a very specific place, the land of Shinar, Mesopotamia, the same region where the Watchers had first descended, the same region where the Nephilim had ruled. Nimrod built cities Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, 4 cities forming the foundation of what would become the Babylonian Empire. And at the centre of it all was a tower. The Tower of Babel is often taught as a story about pride, humanity wanting to reach the heavens, and God stepping in to humble them by confusing their language. But that's a surface reading. The deeper story is far more sinister. The tower was not just a tall building, it was a ziggurat, a step pyramid with a temple at the top. These structures were common in Mesopotamia, and they served a specific purpose. They were gates, portals, places where heaven and earth were believed to meet. The Hebrew word for Babel is derived from Babel, which means gate of God. But the text makes a wordplay. Babel also sounds like Balal, which means confusion. What was intended as a gate became a curse. Nimrod's goal was not to climb up to heaven, it was to bring heaven down, to reopen the gateway that had been closed, to re-invite the Watchers. The tower was an act of cosmic rebellion, an attempt to reverse the flood, to undo the separation between the divine and human realms that God had violently enforced. And the people said, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth." That phrase, make a name, is significant. In the ancient world, a name was not just an identifier, it was power, identity, authority. The Nephilim were called men of renown, literally, men of the name. Nimrod and his followers were trying to recreate that, to become gods again. God's response was immediate. He came down, not to destroy, but to disrupt. He confused their language. Suddenly, the unified human project fractured into 70 distinct nations, each speaking a different tongue, each scattering to a different part of the earth. The tower was abandoned. The gate was never opened, but the plan didn't die. It went underground. This is where the story takes a turn that most people miss. Genesis 10, right before the Babel narrative, contains a single verse that is easy to skip. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. But there's another son of Cush mentioned earlier, a man named Seba, and from Seba, a lineage that eventually leads to the land of Canaan. The Canaanites, the people who would become Israel's greatest enemies. The people who, according to the text, were still practicing the abominations of the pre-flood world. Child sacrifice, sorcery, temple prostitution, and, most disturbingly, giant worship. When Israel finally enters the Promised Land, 400 years after Abraham, they are told to destroy the Canaanites completely, not enslave them, not convert them, destroy them, every man, woman, and child. This command has been called genocidal. It has been used to attack the morality of the Bible. But if you understand the backstory, it's not genocide, it's surgery. The Canaanites were not just another ethnic group. They were the carriers of the corrupted bloodline. The Nephilim had returned. How? The flood killed the Nephilim bodies, but their spirits, according to the Book of Enoch and later Jewish tradition, did not die. They became the demons, the unclean spirits that roam the earth seeking embodiment. And where there are spirits, there can be influence. Genetic corruption didn't require the Watchers to physically return. It required their knowledge to be preserved. And it was. The occult practices, the forbidden sciences, the rituals designed to summon and channel non-human entities, all of it survived the flood in the mind of man. Nimrod knew, his descendants knew, and they passed it down. By the time Moses sends the 12 spies into Canaan, they come back with a terrifying report. We saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. No, the giants were back, not everywhere, but in concentrated pockets. Canaan, Og of Bashan, whose bed was 13 feet long, Goliath of Gath, over 9 feet tall, wearing armour that weighed 125 pounds. These were not exaggerations. These were the remnant, the leftover traces of the pre-flood world, clinging to existence, fighting to reclaim dominion. Israel's conquest of Canaan was not a land grab. It was the continuation of the war that started in Genesis 6. The war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Every time Israel was commanded to utterly destroy a Canaanite city, they were being told to finish what the flood started, to eliminate the genetic and spiritual contamination before it spread. And every time they failed, every time they let a remnant survive, they paid for it. The Canaanites' gods, Baal and Asherah, seeped into Israelite worship. Child sacrifice crept into the valleys around Jerusalem. The corruption returned. The New Testament doesn't ignore this. Jesus in the Olivet Discourse says, "As were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." He's not talking about people eating and drinking and getting married. He's talking about the conditions, the spiritual atmosphere, the return of the forbidden mixture. Paul writes in Ephesians, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." He's describing the same hierarchy, the same structure. The Watchers, bound but not destroyed, still exerting influence through their subordinates. Peter and Jude both reference the angels who sinned and are now held in chains of gloomy darkness until the judgment. They are quoting Enoch. They are acknowledging the story. The early church knew. The church fathers knew. Origen, Justin Martyr, Tertullian. They all wrote about the Watchers and the Nephilim as literal history. It wasn't until later, when the church became institutionalized and the canon was narrowed, that the story was pushed into the margins. Labelled mythology, stripped of its power. But the story never died. It went underground, just like the tower. Secret societies, occult orders, mystery schools, they all preserve fragments of the original knowledge. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, they speak of the ancient builders, the enlightened ones, the ascended masters. These are the Watchers, rebranded, the same entities offering the same deal. Hidden knowledge in exchange for worship, the same rebellion dressed in new clothes. And now, in our time, the language is shifting again. We don't call them gods or angels anymore. We call them extraterrestrials, advanced intelligences from other planets or dimensions. The UFO phenomenon, especially since 2017, when the Pentagon began releasing official footage, has exploded into mainstream consciousness. These objects defy physics. They perform maneuvers that would liquefy any human pilot. They appear and disappear. They've been seen for millennia, but now they're being acknowledged. What are they? The ancient answer was demons, fallen angels. The modern answer is aliens. But what if they're the same thing? What if the great deception, the lie that Paul warns about in 2 Thessalonians, is not that they will claim to be gods, but that they will claim to be our creators? That humanity is a genetic experiment, that they seeded life on Earth, that they've returned to guide us to the next stage of evolution. It's the same offer. Forbidden knowledge, transformation, becoming like God. The serpent's promise in a new package. The days of Noah are returning, not as metaphor, as pattern. The genetic corruption didn't just affect humans, it went deeper. According to Enoch, the Nephilim began to sin against animals. They mixed species that God had separated. They created hybrids, chimeras, abominations that violated the boundaries written into creation itself. This is why ancient mythology is filled with creatures that shouldn't exist. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, the centaurs, the satyrs, the griffins, and sphinxes. We treat these as imagination, creative fiction from primitive minds trying to explain the world. But what if they were memories, distorted, exaggerated through centuries of retelling, but rooted in something that actually walked the earth? The Hebrew word used in Genesis to describe the corruption is shakath. It means to corrupt, destroy, or ruin, but it also carries the specific meaning of genetic ruin. The same word is used when God looks at the earth and sees that all flesh had corrupted its way, i.e., not just humans, all flesh, the animals, the plants, the entire biosphere had been tampered with. This wasn't moral corruption alone, it was biological. The Watchers had taught humanity genetic manipulation, and humanity, along with the Nephilim, had run wild with it. They were rewriting the code of life itself, playing God with the building blocks of creation, and the earth was screaming. Violence filled the land, not just war between tribes, but something darker, a kind of chaotic, demonic violence. The Nephilim, these hybrid giants, were not benevolent rulers. They were tyrants, cannibals according to some texts. They consumed humans. They consumed each other. The world had become a nightmare, a realm where the strong devoured the weak, where knowledge had become a curse and where the very fabric of reality was unravelling. This is the context that the modern reader misses. When we read, God saw that the wickedness of man was great, we picture lying, stealing, maybe some idolatry. We don't picture a planet overrun by genetically engineered giants, hybrid animals, and forbidden technologies that had torn open dimensions humanity was never meant to access. But that's the world. That's what was happening. And God's response was not arbitrary. It was surgical. The archangels looked down and saw the blood. The crying of the earth reached heaven. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, the four who stand before the throne, went to the Most High and said, "The earth is dying. The Watchers have destroyed it. What do we do?" Was it And the answer came in stages. First, bind the Watchers. Azazel, the leader who taught metallurgy and warfare, was to be cast into the desert, into a place of jagged rocks, and buried under darkness until the day of judgment. Samyaza and the others were to be bound under the hills of the earth, imprisoned in a place later called Tartarus. They were not destroyed. Not yet, but they were removed from the board, taken out of play, locked in a prison where they could watch but not act. Second, the Nephilim must destroy themselves. The solution was elegant in its brutality. Set them against each other. Let them wage war. Let the giants fight until none remain. And they did. The texts describe a massive civil war among the Nephilim, a conflict so vast it shook the foundations of the earth. The slaughtered each other, Titan against Titan. When the smoke cleared, their bodies lay in heaps, but their spirits, the part of them that was not fully human and not fully angelic, did not die. They became disembodied, wandering, seeking hosts. This is the origin of demons, not fallen angels, those are bound. Demons are the ghosts of the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers, cursed to roam the earth without rest. Jesus encounters them constantly in the Gospels. They recognize him. They know who he is. Have you come to torment us before the time? Yain, they ask. They know there's a clock. They know their fathers are bound and that a final judgment is coming, and they are terrified. Third, the flood. the ultimate reset. God tells Noah, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." The word sorry there is nachem in Hebrew. It means to be grieved, to relent, to change course. It's not regret in the human sense of making a mistake. It's a divine grief over what his creation had become, a decision to undo the corruption and start again. The flood was not a temper tantrum, it was chemotherapy. The earth had cancer, the genetic code had been rewritten. The spiritual atmosphere was poisoned. The only way to cleanse it was to drown it, to submerge the entire planet underwater and let the weight of the deep crush the abominations back into the mud. Noah was chosen because his line was still pure. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. The word perfect there is tamim. It means complete, whole, without blemish. It's the same word used to describe sacrificial animals, unblemished, genetically pure. Noah's family had not mixed with the Nephilim. His bloodline was still fully human, untainted by the Watcher's corruption. That's why he was chosen. Not because he was morally superior to everyone else, though he was righteous, but because his DNA was clean. He could carry forward the true human race. The ark was not just a boat, it was a genetic repository, a seed bank. Noah was commanded to bring 2 of every kind, male and female, to preserve them. Why? Because the animals too had been corrupted. The flood would destroy the hybrids, the chimeras, the things that should not exist. But the pure kinds, the original blueprints, had to be saved. When the water, RS, receded, the world was clean. The giants were gone. The hybrids were extinct. The watchers were bound. The earth could begin again, but the spiritual war was not over. The demonic spirits, the disembodied Nephilim, were still here, roaming, seeking, influencing, and the watchers, though bound, were not silent. They could still communicate, still influence, still whisper through the veil. The story did not end with the flood. It paused. The question is, what happened next? Did the sons of God come again? Did they try a second time? The answer is yes. Deuteronomy and Numbers both reference giants after the flood. The Anakim, the Rephaim, Og of Bashan, whose bed was 13 feet long, Goliath of Gath, over 9 feet tall with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. The Genitai, sea marker of the Nephilim. These were not natural mutations, they were remnants. Either the corruption survived through one of Noah's daughters-in-law, a theory some hold, or there was a second, smaller incursion, a post-flood attempt by other fallen beings to reintroduce the hybrid line. This is why God commanded Israel to utterly destroy certain Canaanite tribes. Not genocide for the sake of cruelty, but targeted removal of a genetic and spiritual threat. The Canaanites were not just pagans, many of them were giants, descendants of the Nephilim, and they had to be eliminated. When Israel failed to obey, when they left survivors, those survivors became a thorn in their side for generations. The Philistines, the Amalekites, the worshippers of Moloch who burned their children in fire. These were not just bad neighbours, they were the enemy. The same enemy from before the flood, reconstituted. And the spiritual principalities behind them were the same watchers, still pulling strings, still trying to corrupt, still offering forbidden knowledge in exchange for worship. This is the war that never ended. This is the context of the entire Bible, a cosmic battle between the Creator and the rebels, between the pure line of Adam, carried through Seth, through Noah, through Abraham, through David, and ultimately to Jesus, and the corrupted line of the Nephilim, the seed of the serpent. Every major conflict in Scripture is a shadow of this war. David versus Goliath is not just a boy with a sling. It's the pure seed versus the giant, the human versus the hybrid, the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of the watchers. And Jesus, the second Adam, comes to finish what the flood started, to crush the head of the serpent, to bind the strong man, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to open the prison to those who are bound. He descends, he confronts the powers, he dies, and in dying he defeats them. Colossians says he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame, triumphing over them in the cross. He didn't just forgive sins, he broke the chain of corruption. He restored the human race to its original design. But the war is still not over. Revelation says the dragon, that ancient serpent, will be bound for 1,000 years, then released for a short time. The Watchers, the same beings who fell in Genesis, will be loosed again. One final attempt, one last hour, rebellion, and then the final judgment, the lake of fire, the second death, the complete and total eradication of the corruption, the restoration of all things, the new heaven and new earth where nothing unclean will ever enter again. This is not ancient mythology. This is the thread that runs through the entire story, from Genesis to Revelation, from the garden to the New Jerusalem, the war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, between the sons of God who fell and the Son of God who rose. And we are living in the echo of that war. Every act of rebellion, every lie, every corruption, every attempt to rewrite what God has written is a continuation of what the Watchers started. And every act of faith, every choice to obey, every moment we align ourselves with the Creator, or instead of the rebels, is a victory in that war. The reality that most people never grasp is that we are not living in a post-war world. We are living in an occupied territory. The war is paused, not finished. The principalities and powers that Paul warned about in Ephesians are not metaphors. They are the Watchers who are bound, their offspring who became demons, and the spiritual architecture they built that still governs the unseen systems of this world. When you read about the beast rising from the sea in Revelation, you are reading about the final resurrection of the hybrid empire, the last attempt to rebuild what was destroyed in the flood. This is why the Bible is so obsessed with bloodlines, why genealogies matter, why Israel was commanded to keep itself separate. It was never about racial purity in the human sense. It was about genetic and spiritual purity in the cosmic sense. The line had to remain uncorrupted so that the Messiah could come through it. One perfect human. One Adam who never fell. One who could undo what the first Adam and the Watchers had broken. But here is where it gets even stranger. The Watchers did not just corrupt humanity, they corrupted the entire natural order. The Book of Jasher, another ancient text referenced in the Bible, but lost to most modern readers, says that in the days before the flood, the corruption extended to animals, that the Watchers and their offspring began mixing species, creating hybrids that were never meant to exist. This is where the myths of chimeras, centaurs and sphinxes come from. Not imagination, memory. The ancient world was filled with beings that defied natural law, and God's response was not to ignore it. It was to erase it. The flood was not just about punishing human sin, it was about resetting creation itself, cleansing the biosphere of genetic abominations that had no place in the original design. This is why God told Noah to bring 2 of every kind onto the ark. He was preserving the pure seed, the uncorrupted DNA of the animal kingdom, while the rest was washed away. Now think about what this means for the modern world. If the spirits of the Nephilim became the demons, then every instance of demonic possession in the New Testament is an echo of this ancient war. When Jesus casts out Legion, a demon that identifies itself as many, and it begs to enter a herd of pigs, what are we really seeing? A disembodied hybrid spirit, desperate for a physical form, willing to inhabit even an unclean animal rather than remain in the void. The demons know who Jesus is. They recognize him immediately. They call him the Son of the Most High. They know the hierarchy, they know the war, and they know their time is short. This is not folklore. This is the continuation of the Genesis 6 rebellion playing out in real time in the Gospels. But the story does not end with the binding of the Watchers. Enoch says they will be imprisoned for 70 generations. 70 generations from the flood brings us to roughly the time of Christ. And what does the New Testament say? It says that Jesus descended into the lower parts of the earth after his crucifixion, that he went and preached to the spirits in prison. Peter and Jude both reference this. Jesus went to the place where the watchers were bound and proclaimed his victory over them. He didn't set them free. He declared their defeat. The cross was not just about human redemption. It was about cosmic conquest. The powers and principalities that had ruled the earth since Eden were stripped of their authority. Colossians says he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. This is why the veil of the temple tore. The barrier between the earthly and the heavenly was torn open. Access was restored. The curse was reversed. But Revelation tells us the story is not over. The dragon, the ancient serpent, will be bound for 1,000 years, then released for a short time. One final rebellion. One last attempt to gather the nations, to surround the camp of the saints, to overthrow the kingdom of God, and then fire from heaven devours them. The final judgment, the lake of fire, the second death, the complete and total eradication of everything the Watchers started. This is the arc of the Bible, from the garden to the New Jerusalem, from the first Adam to the second Adam, from the fall to the restoration, and the thread that runs through it all is the war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, between the Creator and the rebels, between the pure and the corrupted. We are not living in a random universe where things just happen. We are living in a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the climax of that story has already happened. Jesus won, the Watchers lost, the Nephilim are gone, the curse is broken. But the consequences are still playing out. The spirits are still at war. The dragon is still thrashing. And we are caught in the middle. Every choice we make is a choice of allegiance. Every time we align ourselves with the Creator, we are participating in his victory. Every time we choose rebellion, we are echoing the fall. This is not abstract theology. This is the reality of the human condition. We are spiritual beings in a physical world, surrounded by forces we cannot see but can absolutely feel. The ancient world understood this. They built their temples on high places because they believed the gods lived there. They offered sacrifices because they believed the gods demanded blood. They practiced divination and sorcery because they believed the gods would give them power. And they were right, the gods were real. They were the Watchers, the fallen ones, the rebels, and they did give power, but it came at a price. Always. This is why the prophets railed against the high places, why Israel was commanded to tear down the altars, why the worship of Baal and Asherah was punishable by death. It was not about religious intolerance, it was about severing the connection to the Watchers, breaking the covenant with the fallen, refusing to participate in the rebellion. And the same battle is happening today. The names have changed, the rituals look different, but the underlying reality is the same. The world is still offering forbidden knowledge, still promising power, still demanding worship, and the choice is still the same. Will you align with the Creator or the rebels? Will you participate in the restoration or the corruption? This is the legacy of the Watchers. Not just a story from the distant past, a living reality that shapes the present. The war is not over, it is just hidden, and the final chapter is still being written. The flood was the first reset, the cross was the second, and Revelation promises a third, a final cleansing, a new heaven and a new earth where nothing unclean will ever enter again, where the sea, the symbol of chaos, is no more, where death itself is thrown into the lake of fire, where the tree of life is restored and the curse is lifted forever. But until that day comes, the battle continues. The spirits rage, the dragon deceives, and we are called to stand. Not in our own strength, not with our own wisdom, but with the authority of the one who descended, who conquered, who rose, and who is coming back to finish what he started. The seed of the woman has crushed the head of the serpent. The giants have fallen. The Watchers are bound. and we are the ones who carry the victory forward, not as victims, as conquerors, not as slaves, as sons and daughters of the Most High. The same God who looked down at the corruption in Genesis 6 and said enough, the same God who sent the flood, the same God who sent his Son, the same God who will send fire from heaven. He is not distant, he is not silent, he is at war, and he is winning. The question now is not what happened back then. The question is what is happening now. Because if the story of the Watchers is true, if the Nephilim walked the earth and corrupted everything they touched, if the flood was a judgment against hybrid contamination, then the implications for today are staggering. The Bible itself warns that the pattern will repeat. Jesus said it plainly in Matthew 24. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. People were eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Most sermons focus on the obliviousness of the people. They were distracted, living normal lives, unaware of the coming judgment. But the phrase carries a darker weight when you understand what was really happening in the days of Noah. It was not just business as usual. It was the age of the Watchers, the age of forbidden unions, the age when the boundaries between heaven and earth, between human and divine, were shattered. If Jesus is drawing a direct parallel, then the implication is clear. The end times will not just be marked by spiritual apathy. They will be marked by a return of the same corruption, the same boundary violations, the same tampering with creation itself. And when you look at the trajectory of the modern world, the pieces start to align in a way that is impossible to ignore. Consider the explosion of interest in the phenomenon, once dismissed as fringe lunacy, unidentified aerial phenomena, non-human intelligence. The Pentagon has declassified footage. Military pilots are testifying before Congress. The language has shifted from conspiracy theory to national security concern. But here is what is rarely discussed in those hearings. The behaviour of these objects does not match any known physics. They violate inertia. They appear and disappear. They seem to respond to human consciousness, and the encounters with them often leave people changed. Psychologically, spiritually, genetically, in some cases. Abduction accounts, when stripped of the sci-fi veneer, sound disturbingly similar to the ancient stories. Beings of light descending, hybrid offspring, forbidden kaon, owlage transferred, genetic experimentation. The language has changed. We call them greys instead of watchers. We say abduction instead of union. We frame it as extraterrestrial instead of extra-dimensional. But the pattern is identical. Dr. Jacques Vallée, one of the most respected researchers in the field, has argued for decades that the UFO phenomenon is not extraterrestrial in origin. It is interdimensional. It has been with humanity since the beginning, shape-shifting its presentation to fit the cultural context of each era. In ancient times, they were gods and angels. In the medieval period, they were fairies and elves. In the modern era, they are aliens. Same entities, different masks. And their agenda has always been the same: to deceive, to corrupt, to blur the line between the created and the creator. Then there is the genetic revolution. We are living in the age of CRISPR. Gene editing is no longer science fiction. It is being done in labs right now. Humanity has the ability to rewrite the code of life itself, to insert genes from one species into another, to create hybrids that have never existed, to play God. In 2019, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui shocked the world by announcing he had edited the genes of human embryos, creating the first genetically modified babies. The global scientific community condemned him, but the door had been opened. The technology exists, the knowledge is out there, and history shows that once a technology becomes possible, it becomes inevitable. We are already creating chimeras, human-animal hybrids for research purposes, pigs with human cells, mice with human brain tissue, monkeys with human genes inserted into their DNA. The stated goal is medical advancement, organ transplants, disease research, but the ethical line is eroding. If you can edit one gene, why not 10? If you can enhance intelligence, why not strength? If you can eliminate disease, why not design the perfect human? The transhumanist movement is not hiding its goals. They openly speak of merging humanity with machines, of uploading consciousness, of transcending biology, of becoming gods. This is not speculation, this is stated ideology, and it is being funded by some of the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet. Elon Musk's Neuralink is working to implant chips directly into the human brain. Google's Calico is researching life extension and immortality. ARPA is developing super soldiers with enhanced cognitive and physical abilities. The language is always framed in terms of progress, evolution, the next step. But strip away the marketing, and what you're left with is the same ancient ambition: to break the boundary, to rewrite creation, to become something other than human. And the spiritual dimension is undeniable. The occult has come out of the shadows. What was once hidden in secret societies is now mainstream. Celebrities openly practice witchcraft. Tarot and astrology are normalized. Channeling and spirit guides are rebranded as wellness and mindfulness. The line between entertainment and ritual is blurred. Music videos are filled with symbolism that would have been recognized instantly by any ancient priest of Baal. Awards shows resemble dark ceremonies. The imagery is not accidental, it is deliberate, and it is accelerating. The Bible warned that in the last days people would give themselves over to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, that they would call good evil and evil good, that they would exchange the truth for a lie. We are watching it happen in real time. The deception is not coming from the fringe, it is coming from the institutions, from the universities, from the media, from the governments. The same voices that mock the Bible as primitive mythology are the ones telling us that we are cosmic accidents, that consciousness is just chemicals, that there is no ultimate meaning, that we must create our own truth. But if there is no truth, then there is no lie. If there is no creator, then there is no rebellion. If there is no law, then there is no judgment. And that is exactly what the deceiver wants you to believe. Because if you believe the lie, you will participate in the corruption. You will take the mark. You will edit the gene. You will merge with the machine. You will call upon the spirits, and you will lose what may aches you human, not just biologically, spiritually. The Watchers were judged for crossing the boundary. The Nephilim were destroyed because they were corruptions of the image of God. The flood came because the earth was filled with violence, and every intent of the heart was only evil continually. And Jesus said the same conditions would return. We are not there yet, but the trajectory is clear. The technology is here. The spiritual deception is normalized. The boundaries are being tested. And the question is the same one humanity has always faced. Will you submit to the Creator or align with the rebels? The war is not over. It has just entered a new phase. The Watchers are bound, but their spirits still operate. The Nephilim are dead, but their legacy endures. The flood cleansed the earth, but the seed of corruption was preserved through the He bloodlines. And now, at the end of the age, the same ancient powers are positioning themselves for one final attempt. Not through brute force this time, through deception, through technology, through the promise of transcendence. The mark of the beast is not just a symbol, it is a participation in the corruption, a voluntary surrender of the image of God, a merging with the system of the dragon. And once you take it, there is no going back, because you will no longer be fully human. You will be something else, a hybrid, a corruption. And just like the Nephilim, there will be no redemption, no second chance, no ark to escape to. But there is still time. The door is still open. The choice is still before us. The same God who looked down at the corruption in Genesis 6 and said enough is the same God who sent his Son to redeem what was broken. The same God who will return to judge the living and the dead. The same God who promises a new heaven and a new earth where the dragon is cast into the lake of fire and death is no more. The story of the Watchers is not just ancient history. It is prophecy. It is warning. It is a mirror held up to every generation, showing us what happens when we reach for the forbidden, when we blur the boundaries, when we try to become gods. The answer has always been the same: judgment, but also mercy. For those who repent, for those who choose the Creator over the creation, for those who refuse the mark and hold fast to the image of God within them. The Watchers fell. The Nephilim were destroyed. The flood came. And the pattern will repeat. But this time, the cleansing will not be water. It will be fire. And when the smoke clears, only those who are sealed, who are protected, who belong to the Lamb will remain. The war is real, the stakes are eternal, and the choice is yours. So here we stand, at the edge of the same cliff our ancestors stood at, staring into the same abyss. The technology has changed, the language has evolved, but the choice remains identical. Will we guard the image of God within us, or will we trade it for the promise of transcendence? The Watchers made their choice on Mount Hermon. They swore an oath knowing full well what they were unleashing. They chose rebellion over obedience, power over submission, and they dragged humanity down with them. The Nephilim were not accidents, they were weapons, designed to corrupt the bloodline, to make redemption impossible, to ensure that when the promised seed came, there would be no pure line left to carry it. But they failed. Noah was found blameless in his generation, not morally perfect, genetically intact. The flood was not God losing his temper. It was God performing surgery, cutting out the cancer before it consumed the entire body. And when the waters receded, the world began again. Smaller, weaker, but clean. The spirits of the Nephilim still wander, still seek, still whisper. Every demon Jesus cast out was an echo of that ancient corruption. Every possessed man was a battlefield in the war that never ended. And when the disciples asked why the demons were so afraid, Jesus told them plainly, their time is short. They know what's coming. They've read the script. They know how this ends. Revelation does not describe something new. It describes the final act of something very old. The beast rising from the sea is not a political system. It's the resurrection of the hybrid empire. The mark is not just an economic control mechanism. It's the final corruption, the last attempt to rewrite what God wrote in Eden. And those who take it are choosing the same path the Watchers chose, trading the image of God for the promise of godhood. But here's what they don't tell you in the marketing materials. Godhood is a lie. It always has been. The serpent promised Eve that eating the fruit would make her like God. It didn't. It made her mortal. The Watchers promised humanity knowledge and power. What they delivered was violence and death. The transhumanists promise you immortality and transcendence. What they will deliver is the same thing they have always delivered: corruption, slavery, and ultimately, judgment. Because the pattern does not change. The players rotate, the technology upgrades, but the script remains the same. Rebellion, corruption, judgment, reset. We are living in the space between the last reset and the next one. The cross defeated the powers, but it did not destroy them. Not yet. They are wounded, disarmed, humiliated, but still operational, still fighting, still deceiving. And they are running out of time. The 70 generations Enoch spoke of have passed. The Watchers have been bound for millennia, but Revelation promises they will be loosed for a short season. One final rebellion. One last attempt to gather the nations and storm the throne. And then fire. Not water this time. Fire from heaven. And after the fire, silence. The dragon cast into the lake. Death swallowed up. The curse lifted. The tree of life restored. A new heaven. A new earth where the sea is no more. No more chaos, no more corruption, no more hybrids, no more rebellion, just the Creator and His creation, finally reconciled, finally at peace. But until that day, the war continues. And you are not a bystander, you are a combatant. Every choice you make is a vote. Every decision is an allegiance. Every moment you choose truth over deception, purity over corruption, obedience over rebellion, you are participating in the victory that has already been won but is still being enforced. The Watchers are proof that knowledge without boundaries is poison, that power without submission is destruction, that transcendence without the Creator is just another word for damnation. They crossed the line, they paid the price, and they are still paying it, bound in chains, waiting for the fire, watching as the plan they tried to destroy unfolds exactly as it was written. The Nephilim are proof that some things should never exist, that there are boundaries written into creation that are not suggestions. They are laws, and when you violate them, you do not break the law, you break yourself against it. The giants rose, the giants fell, and their spirits still haunt the ruins of what they destroyed. Looking for bodies, looking for hosts, looking for one more chance to taste the flesh they lost. But the flood is proof that God does not lose. He does not compromise. He does not negotiate with corruption. When the line is crossed, He resets the board. And when the final line is crossed, He will reset it for the last time, not with water, with fire. And everything that carries the mark of the beast, everything that has traded the image of God for the image of the dragon, will burn. The story of the Watchers is not ancient mythology. It is the origin story of the war you're living in right now. The battlefield has shifted. The weapons have changed, but the stakes are identical. Your humanity, your soul, your eternal destiny. The enemy wants you to believe you're an accident, a cosmic fluke, a random assembly of chemicals with no purpose and no future. Because if you believe that, you will trade yourself for anything. A longer lifespan, a sharper mind, a stronger body, a uploaded consciousness, a promised transcendence. But you're not an accident. You are made in the image of God. And that image is the one thing the enemy cannot replicate, cannot corrupt, cannot steal, unless you give it away. The Watchers tried to corrupt it through genetics. The Nephilim tried to breed it out. The flood tried to wash it away, but it survived. In one man, in one family, in one bloodline that carried forward until the day the second Adam stepped onto the same earth the first Adam lost. And the second Adam did what the first could not. He resisted, he obeyed, he died. And in dying he crushed the head of the serpent. He disarmed the Watchers. He bound the strong man. He declared victory in the throne room of the enemy. And then he rose, proving that death itself, the final weapon of the rebellion, had no power over the image of God when that image is held in submission to the Creator. You carry that image right now, in your DNA, in your spirit, in the breath that fills your lungs, and the enemy wants it, not to destroy it, to corrupt it, to trade it, to make you something other than what you were designed to be. And the moment you make that trade, you become unredeemable, not because God lacks mercy, but because you will no longer be the thing He created. You will be something else, a hybrid, a corruption, a Nephilim in modern skin. The days of Noah are not coming. They are here. The boundaries are being tested. The knowledge is being offered. The promise is being made. And the choice is before you. The ark is still open, but not forever. The door will close. The rain will fall. And those who chose the dragon over the lamb will discover too late that the dragon was never a saviour. He was a predator, and they were always the prey. The Watchers are bound. The Nephilim are dead. The flood has passed, the cross stands. The empty tomb remains, and the king is returning. Not as a baby, not as a servant, as a conqueror, with a sword, with fire, with a judgment that will make the flood look like a warning shot. And every knee will bow, not in worship, in recognition, that the rebellion is over, that the war is won, that the Creator never lost control. He was simply patient, giving every generation the same choice, the same chance, the same door. The story of the Watchers is your story. Their fall is your warning. Their judgment is your future, if you choose their path. But their defeat is your victory, if you choose his. The war is not over, but the outcome is not in doubt. The enemy knows it. The demons know it. The Watchers in chains know it. The only question is whether you know it, and whether you will stand on the side that wins or the side that burns.